Afternoon, YouTube. So here we go, another video to help you to liberate your minds. And today I want to talk about something that happens to quite a lot of people, and it basically is very debilitating, and it stops them from living the kind of lives that they want to live. Now, I work quite a lot with people that have this issue, which is panic attacks. And it's one of the most intense experiences a person can have and one of the most frightening. However, it happens to be one of the easiest things to resolve. And I'm not talking about learn to live with. And this is something that's come up for me because I've kind of done a little bit of research about what's out there from the experts and the medical field and the psychology field. And I was quite shocked to find that even though there was some really great information about what they are and how to manage the symptoms, it very much was about learning to live with it, as opposed to letting people know that there is a real and quite fast way to permanently resolve this condition. And I can say that because I've done it hundreds of times. Especially when I used to work at a music college or music colleges, because there was a lot of that happening. A lot of people, when they are under stressful circumstances like performing, do actually suffer from panic attacks. So there's good news, right? You do not have to live with this. You can manage the symptoms very well and you can reduce the symptoms on your own. But if you do go and see the right therapist, and I say that because there is so much choice. And it's not that I'm saying that some therapies are better than others. I'm simply saying that sometimes certain therapies aren't the right tool for the job. All right? Especially in this case, things like talking therapies, because this is not a conscious problem. And you can't solve an unconscious problem consciously. Because even if you talk it out and come up with strategies and ideas, they might help you to manage, but it certainly will not permanently resolve that. And often when you are triggered and you are having a panic attack, all of that goes out the window because you are no longer in that front part of the brain where all of your resources and logical and rational thought live. You have moved into a completely different part of the brain and you are literally in survival mode. So let's talk about what panic attacks are in a lot more detail. So the simplest way for me to describe that is to say that it is a trauma response, right? So you may know it as the fight, flight, freeze. That's probably what you know it as, fight, flight, or freeze. It's when the body is reacting to what it perceives as a threat, a danger, all right? And when you're in that, you do experience the kind of symptoms that you would when you're having a panic attack. However, it can vary on the degree of intensity depending on yourself and how you respond to things. And everyone's slightly different. But what makes panic attacks so frightening is they tend to come on out of nowhere. Apparently, right? You can't really see a reason for why this is happening. And because it's quite an extreme reaction in the body, the brain starts to tell a story about what's happening. And when you've moved into that primitive, emotional survival part of the brain, the flavor of that thinking is always worst case scenario. So because these symptoms can be quite extreme, like the heart's beating out the chest, the breathing is so fast, it's difficult to get oxygen, you're panicking, all the blood's rushing, through your body, getting tingly hands and feet and sweating profusely. All of these kinds of things, when the brain starts to tell a story about that, people do think that they're dying, they're having heart attacks or strokes or, whatever it might be. And it can be very frightening. And I know that firsthand because I've had many panic attacks myself. But not anymore. So that's what's going on there. But let's tell you about why it starts and how it persists, and the reason why people tend to make things worse than they have to be, and it gets kind of amplified out of control, if you like. So trauma is your body's reaction to an event. It's a very highly emotional event, and in that moment, the brain, or the amygdala in this case, which are two almond-sized sensors behind the eye, and it takes a snapshot of everything that it sees, hears, feels, what's going on inside the body, what's going on outside the body in that moment, and it stores that as a freeze moment of time on a loop in your hippocampus, so it can be checked and now scanned out here for. Now, when that's happening, if you happen to be in a panic at the time, then it takes that as one of the many criteria that it's now searching for. So if your heart was beating incredibly fast, you were short of breath, or you may have been in a certain place, there were crowds of people around, it's documenting all of this information. So you can get different kind of trauma responses, and that's why I'm saying that the kind of panic attack being the breathing and the heart beating thing is quite intense. And the reason that it's the degree of, threat that the body detects is on the experience that you have, the physiological response to it. So what happens is, and it's the same, so if the amygdala goes click and you happen to be breathing in pollen, it sees pollen as part of the threat, and that's where the hay fever response comes from. If you happen to be incredibly fatigued and tired at the time, it sees being fatigued as part of the threat, and that's where things like ME comes from. That when the body starts to get tired, and then that puts the body into fight or flight, which causes a lot of adrenaline, which then makes the body tired, and around we go. And that's why that's going on. That's why things like allergies are going on and all the rest of it. Now, in this case, panicking was part of that original event. So think about it. If it's now looking for that to be happening again in the body, or it's also looking at the circumstances you were in, if you were in a crowd or whatever it was, if your body starts to, or your amygdala starts to sense that again, it goes into fight or flight. And it doesn't tell you it's going to go into fight or flight. It happens suddenly. And of course, because there's now an extreme emotion that seems to have come out of the blue, the brain, which is now in that part of the brain, which means the flavor is very negative, is going to start telling a story about that, right? I'm starting to panic. I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm dying. Now, something to say about this is adrenaline itself should only be pumping or squirting for a very short amount of time, and then the body starts to calm down, unless we continue to throw another log on the fire to keep that fire burning. And in this case, it's the thinking that we have, right? When we start to panic, when we start to have worrying thoughts about what might happen, making pictures and images, of impending doom, the adrenaline keeps squirting, the response keeps happening. So the more you think about how anxious and frightening this is, the more the body starts to feel more anxious, and that the fight or flight response increases, and then around we go, right? It just makes the thinking worse, the feeling gets worse, and it gets out of control until eventually another chemical kicks in, which is a hormone that calms the body down eventually, right? The problem is, the more you try and run, fix it, hide, whatever it is that you're trying to do, especially if you're trying to think your way out of it, because you will just make the situation worse, because it is not a conscious problem. It's a physiological, unconscious response to what the body is perceived as a threat. And that could be something as simple as, this is the thing, it's debilitating because once you've had a panic attack and it was very unpleasant, you are now worrying that you're going to have one again. However, worry, which is what you do with your thoughts, triggers, the body responds to your thoughts by creating anxiety. And anxiety is itself the trigger that tells the amygdala that you're now in danger. So this is why it's so perpetual and it keeps happening, and it's a loop, because whenever you start to get anxious, the body thinks it's happening again, and therefore you have a physiological, your heart starts to beat, which again, you go into fight or flight, the brain starts to worry about it because it's had previous experiences, and around we go again. So what you've got going on here is a negative loop. So there are two aspects that need to be sorted out here. All of the traumatic events that have already happened, right? We need to neutralize all of those first. And we can very easily, very safely, so that the brain no longer is referencing anything from your past as a potential thing to look out for in your future. Okay, so that deals with the trauma. And now we need to deal with the mechanism that's been created to try and protect you, this anxious, worrying, state, this pattern that you do that speeds up. So the brain speeds up, as you start to think and catastrophize. But you also do, the reason it's a bit debilitating as well is because you're now frightened to go out or go anywhere or see, go to concerts or crowded spaces or restaurants, whatever it is. And the more you overthink, the more your world starts to shrink. And of course, your comfort zone gets smaller and smaller until you just don't want to go out anymore. And I actually got a client arriving here very shortly that actually had that. And of course, then we start to try and medicate ourselves with drugs, alcohol, food, TV, whatever it might be. But that's not, again, so that's not solving it. That's not even properly managing it. That's just kind of trying to numb it or take the pain away. So what is the medical industry's solution to this? They will say to you, talking therapy and maybe CBT, which is getting more on the realms of that working out, but that's still only a 40% success rate and about 20% of those relapse. Or pills like antidepressants, right, to null and numb the senses. But again, neither of those things, are necessarily dealing with what we're talking about here, which is root cause. The original events that happened. By neutralizing the emotions from that, making those safe, those memories get moved up, and then we will deal with the anxious pattern that happens in the moment and getting the body to recognize that anxiety itself is, in this case, unhelpful, and we can neutralize and collapse that and soothe the body. There is so much we can do with that. But what I'm telling you here is you can easily, permanently resolve this issue so that you can just go where you want and do what you want to do once again. So as I said, there are lots and lots of videos out there, and I could sit here and give you lots of tools to help you manage panic attacks. And I might even include some, because obviously I can't do therapy with you through the screen. You'd have to sign up with me or another therapist. And I train therapists how to do this. I supervise other therapists and hypnotherapists. So what you're looking for is a hypnotherapist or NLP specialist, right? Preferably that says they have experience in resolving this kind of an issue permanently. And it should only take a few sessions, right? It might take, I could probably do it in one session, but I wouldn't want to do that. I want to take a couple of weeks and do it properly and make sure that I'm being systematic and thorough about removing and resolving all of the things that are triggering this in the first place. And once the feeling changes, the thinking changes, which means, again, you're not triggering it by thinking or worrying. And also the physiology, the triggers, the traumas in the body and the mind, everything else, it's resolved, it's done. So you don't need to live on tablets and various other things. So I might include some videos for people just watching this. I've got various tools that I've taught in the past, so I might put some links in the comments or somewhere to help you to, manage that until you can get to some, the right kind of therapist. But, really, it's not like it'd probably be worth your time to invest in yourself for a couple of, therapy sessions where you can get this released, rather than just living with it for the rest of your life. Because I've been looking at some of these videos and reading the comments, and they're just saying, it's ruining my life. I'm living on this. And of course, there are side effects to taking pills, and it's just a shame to see so many people suffering. So hopefully that the other thing that people will teach is exposure therapy, which I think I kind of understand the logic. And of course it will work to a point, which is essentially you're getting yourself worked up to create similar symptoms to the panic attack. So you're getting comfortable with being out of breath and, heart's going and all the rest of it. Fair enough, but that can bring on a panic attack. And, why should you have to get used to training yourself to feel uncomfortable like that? Would it not be better in a very safe, comfortable, quick and efficient way to just resolve the idea that your body thinks that your heart beating faster when you're doing sports, or breathing, getting out of breath, instead of your body perceiving that as I'm about to die, to just being what it is, which is a normal, natural way for the body to be. So again, it's an unconscious problem. And it starts off with something happens, an actual event where, you might have a physical thing going on. Maybe your stress levels were too high, or you had some kind of medical thing that wasn't serious, but you didn't know that at the time. And again, the brain told a story and the loop happened where the more you overthought it, the more your heart got like this, and you worked yourself up into a panic. Your amygdala went save. And then it's now every time you start to get a little bit similar with the heart and everything else, you get triggered into a full-blown panic attack, And of course, now you're anxious. So you're now compensating for that, and your lifestyle's changing, and you're losing your confidence and your self-esteem and all the knock-on effect. You've started to try and medicate with habits. So it's all surface level stuff, but all of that goes away when you redress the original moments and the mechanisms that have been created. So that's my message for today. Hopefully you found that helpful. I will include some tools to help you manage anxiety and these panic attacks, but go and see a specialist. You can come and see me. I'll put the website details there if you want. I think I'm fully booked at the moment, but people get better quickly when they come here. So it doesn't take me long to get through my waiting list. So happy to help or recommend you to somebody else. There is hope. You do not have to live with this. I hope that's been helpful. Have a wonderful evening.